Okay, into our third part of this episode here, we're going to be talking about Doctrine and Covenants, section 100, and a very interesting warrant and a few more letters. So let's get into the introduction to the 100th section of the Doctrine and Covenants. It is actually on two loose pages, written in Sidney Rigdon's hand, and this, as you might have guessed, is all part of the Isaac Grew collection that was sent to BYU. So that's where it currently is. It's a very clean copy. But it's all tri-folded as if it was going to be sent in a letter. There's also a copy that we get from Revelation Book 2, which is actually in the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery. A little different here. There's an interesting correction by swapping Joseph and Sidney's names. For some reason, that was important to them. So those names have been swapped, as you can see here. Otherwise, it's a very clean copy. We do not get a copy of this in Revelation Book 1. Section 101 is there, but not this one. So for some reason, it didn't make it into Revelation Book 1. I thought for a moment there, I was like, oh man, are we already done with one of these? But not so. We are still going to continue on. There's another one there for sure. It is section 94 in the original Doctrine and Covenants, and we get a copy of this in the manuscript history. So let's do some introductions here. So the Newell K. Whitney papers that we have says, Perrysburg, is it Chautauqua County? I hope I said that right, New York, Saturday, October 12th of 1833. We get the same thing in Revelation Book 2. And the Doctrine and Covenants says this. It says, revelation given in Perrysburg, New York, to Joseph Smith Jr. and Sidney Rigdon, October of 1833. And the manuscript history is kind of short here, but it says, on the 11th, we left Westfield and continued our journey, stayed that night with a man named Nash, an infidel. Okay. With whom we reasoned, but to no good. And on the 12th, arrived at Father Nickerson's, when I received the following revelation given in Perrysburg, New York, to Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon, October 1833. I guess they stayed the night with an infidel, and the infidel wasn't having it, so they moved on. Not a very nice thing to say about somebody, but I guess that's what they do. There are no changes to the modern section headings, and so our historical introduction will fill in the rest of this history. It says, well, before I get into that, the church was having some major missionary success in the areas around sort of Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, as well as Western New York State. So really having a great time. Branches are being formed, many people being baptized at once. And there's ordinations being had, and they sort of set up the church there. And Joseph is a part of this missionary cohort that goes up there, which is really fun. So we get some of the story here from the historical introduction. On the 12th of October, 1833, a week after their departure, the party reached the Nickerson home in Perrysburg. Upon arriving, Joseph Smith wrote in his diary, quote, I feel very well in my mind. The Lord is with us, but have much anxiety about my family, unquote. The revelation featured here, recorded the same day, assured both Joseph Smith and Rigdon that their families were well and would remain so. The main thrust of the revelation, however, was to encourage both men to preach according to the thoughts that would be given to them, assuring them that the Holy Spirit would confirm their message to many individuals in the region who were prepared to receive it. In addition, this revelation called Rigdon to act as a spokesman for Joseph Smith and offered comfort concerning the hardships of church members in Jackson County, Missouri, who were currently facing expulsion. Now, this idea of, hey, there's a prophet and a spokesman starts being likened back to Moses and Aaron, for example. Aaron was the spokesman for Moses. Anyway, that sort of language matches what is in the Old Testament. All right, so Joseph Smith and Cowdery continued their work, started doing some strong branch work in Mount Pleasant, ordained some elders to watch over the church, and then they got back to Kirtland around the end of 1833. So while everything was going on in the summer of 1833, and this is the nasty stuff, all that, Joseph at the same time feels that he has to go on a mission. And so a lot of things going in a lot of different directions here. All right, so let's get into a little of the content and footnotes of this. The text reads this. The text states this, therefore, verily I say unto you, lift up your voices unto this people, speak the thoughts that I shall put into your hearts, and ye shall not be confounded before men. For it shall be given you in the very hour in the very moment what ye shall say, but a commandment I give unto you, that you shall declare whatsoever things ye declare in my name, in solemnity of heart, in the spirit of meekness, in all things. And I give unto you this promise, that inasmuch as ye do this, the Holy Ghost shall be shed forth in bearing record unto all things whatsoever ye shall say. This is a big missionary scripture. Just be sincere, and the Lord will put those thoughts into your mind and heart. Footnote 5 for this says, according to Joseph Smith, the day after he dictated this revelation, quote, the Lord gave his spirit in marvelous manner. John P. Green, who attended the 13th of October meeting, stated that Sidney Rigdon, quote, preached in the demonstration of the Spirit. 2 weeks later, at the conclusion of his and Rigdon's mission in Canada, Joseph Smith wrote that during one of their meetings, quote, the Spirit was given in great power to some, and the rest had great peace. So apparently it came true. Further into the revelation we get, it is expedient in me that you, Sidney, should be spokesman unto this people. Yea, verily, I will ordain you unto this calling, even to be a spokesman unto my servant Joseph, and I will give unto him power to be mighty in testimony, and I will give unto thee power to be mighty in expounding all scriptures, that thou mayest be a spokesman unto him, and he shall be a revelator unto thee, that thou mayest know the certainty of all things pertaining to the things of my kingdom on the earth. Footnote 6 for this says, Rigdon later stated that he had been consecrated a spokesman to Joseph Smith. The day after this revelation was dictated, Joseph Smith noted each of their ministerial roles. Quote, Brother Sidney preached, and I bear record to the people. Shortly after their return to from Canada, Joseph Smith wrote that Sidney Rigdon was, quote, a man of great power of words and could gain the friendship of his hearers very quick. So if I'm reading this correctly, basically Sidney Rigdon would get up and preach about all this stuff, even though Joseph is the president and the prophet of the church. Anyway, Rigdon was the one going nuts. And then Joseph would say, I testify to what he said. So apparently that's how powerful of a speaker Rigdon really was. All right. Further into the text, we get, and now I give unto you a word concerning Zion. Zion shall be redeemed, although she is chastened for a little season. Thy brethren, my servants, Orson Hyde and John Gould, are in my hands, and inasmuch as they keep my commandments, they shall be saved. Footnote 9 for this says, responding to the news of violence perpetuated against church members in Jackson County, Missouri, Joseph Smith sent Orson Hyde and John Gould with letters, other documents, and information to the Church of Christ leadership in Jackson County in late 1833. Hyde and Gould arrived in Jackson County in the latter half of September and assisted beleaguered church members in their efforts to obtain protection against violence. Hyde and Gould returned to Kirtland shortly after attacks against church members again erupted in early November. They arrived on the 25th November 1833 with, quote, the melancholy intelligence of the riot in Zion, with the inhabitants in persecuting the brethren. So, kind of a nasty moment there. All right, so that's it with our 100th section of the Doctrine and Covenants. The next thing we're getting into is kind of a fun little piece of American history and an unfortunate use of it. So this is actually a warrant from the 21st of October, 1833. And in this warrant, we get the handwriting of what's probably Oliver Crary's handwriting. A little redundancy there. But anyway, this is a warrant that is actually held at the Lake County Historical Society records in, you guessed it, Painesville, Ohio. Oh, yeah. Now, this photo that you see here was taken in 2001. And the historical introduction gives a very interesting insight onto what this warrant is. So again, this is in Ohio, just double checking on that one. The warrant featured here represents one of the earliest known anti-Mormon actions taken by local government officials against Joseph Smith and his followers in Ohio. Like other states, Ohio had a law that allowed townships to elect overseers of the poor. These overseers were ostensibly responsible for providing relief to those suffering in indigent circumstances within a township. However, in order to prevent persons who were already destitute from settling within the township boundaries and thus becoming expensive wards, the law allowed overseers to warn out recently arrived settlers to the township who they feared would become a financial burden. Once such persons were warned, the township could absolve itself of future liability for their care. Kind of a dirty trick. And maybe I should say at the same time, maybe that makes some sense. But anyway, this was kind of a common tactic. So a little further into the historical introduction. By superficially warning targeted individuals out of a township on the basis of alleged poverty, townships could delay newcomers from obtaining legal residence and thus indefinitely prevent them from attaining the right to vote and influencing local politics. For example, in 1832 in Hudson, Ohio, about 35 miles south of Kirtland, a newspaper reported that someone had been warned out because of his political and social beliefs. The article lamented that one man had been warned out of town because he belonged to the Temperance Society. So we want to drink here. We don't need your garbage. Get out of here. They warned him out. They said, oh, you're a poor person. We have decided you're a poor person, and we don't want you to be a burden on us. Get out. This was a thing. And that was not to a Latter-day Saint. That was just a thing that happened in the news, according to the newspaper. So, but it was sent out. So we get this again. On the 21st of October, 1833, Constable William G. Crary received an order to warn out of the Kirtland Township the 22 individuals listed in the warrant featured here, and in many cases their families as well. Joseph Smith and his family, his parents, and all those listed in the featured document who can be identified were members of the Church of Christ. On the same day Crary received these orders, another warrant was issued to Constable Stephen Sherman, in which another 28 persons and their families were also ordered to depart the township immediately by order of the overseers of the poor. 26 of these persons can likewise be identified as members of the church. Now, I'm not going to read to you this big list of names, but you just got a few of them. So basically, a lot of members of the church, I would say upwards to about 50, were kicked out because of they were deemed impoverished and therefore get out of my town. So there you go. That's the warrant. We get a letter here written on the 30th of October, printed in the Evening and Morning Star, as you can see. The historical introduction for this one says, according to the letter extract featured here, one day after Dunklin sent his response to church leaders, and this is the governor at the time, and likely before they received his missive, church leaders publicly announced their intentions to defend themselves and to remain on their lands. An Ohio newspaper reported later that members of the church, quote, declined taking up their line of march as they had stipulated, and instead thereof had erected a temporary bulwark and supplied themselves with firelocks for the purpose of nullifying, in accordance with the legal advisement of their prophet, the treaty they had entered into, unquote. So basically, they got some ammo and they build up some bulwarks and they're going to go to town and they're going to fight back. After announcing that they would remain on their lands, church leaders took the advice of both Joseph Smith and Governor Dunklin and hired legal counsel. Now, the reason why I'm getting into this letter is because this is where Alexander Donovan shows up and becomes a very, very key player in early church history. Now, if you don't know who Alexander Donovan is, he is a incredibly big deal. This guy is a really big deal. Now, because I am the amateur historian, I got this from Wikipedia, but the sources are good. So just trust me on that. So we get this from Wikipedia. Alexander William Donovan, who was born in 1808, died in 1887, was a 19th century American attorney, soldier, and politician from Missouri, who is best known today as the man who prevented the summary execution of Joseph Smith, founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, at the close of the 1838 Mormon War in that state. He also achieved renown as a leader of American troops during the Mexican-American War, as the author of a legal code that still forms the basis of New Mexico's Bill of Rights. Again, a big deal. He was the youngest of 10 children of Joseph and Ann Donovan, both natives of Virginia. Joseph had been a friend of Daniel Boone, and both of Alexander's grandfathers had fought in the American Revolution. Pretty nice background. As a brigadier general in the Missouri militia, Donovan was ordered into the field with other forces to operate against the Mormons, even though he had worked diligently to avoid the conflict and believed that the Mormons were largely acting in self-defense. After the surrender of Far West, General Samuel Lucas took custody of Joseph Smith and other Mormon leaders and instituted a drumhead court-martial, or a kangaroo court, which declared Smith and the others guilty of treason and ordered Donovan to execute them. Donovan indignantly refused, saying, quote, "It is cold-blooded murder. I will not obey your order. If you execute these men, I will hold you responsible before an earthly tribunal, so help me God." Unquote. The Mormon leaders were accordingly sent to Liberty Jail during the winter and to await trial during the following spring of 1839, at which trial Donovan was appointed as their defense attorney and energetically defended them at the risk of his good reputation and, in all probability, his life. Ultimately, the church leaders were permitted to escape from custody, and they subsequently made their way to the new Mormon settlement in Hancock County, Illinois, that's Nauvoo, where Joseph Smith was killed in 1844. In Donovan's honor, Joseph and Emma Hale Smith named a son Alexander Hale Smith. So if you don't know, this man was such a big deal that Joseph Smith and Emma named their son Alexander after him, which I thought was really special. Another story about him, in 1843, Porter Rockwell, a controversial Mormon figure, to say the least, later known as the Destroying Angel of Mormondom, was arrested in St. Louis and accused of carrying out a failed assassination attempt on the now former Governor Boggs. Now, William Boggs signed an execution order as the reason why the Saints left Illinois and wound up in Utah. So it was because a governor said, basically, you get out or we will kill you because of your religion, because you're associated with the church. Anyway, so obviously there was an assassination attempt. They assumed it was the Mormons. They assumed it was Porter Rockwell. So continuing. After 9 months of being imprisoned in poor conditions, he was able to hire Donovan to defend him. Donovan managed to have the main charge of attempted murder dismissed for lack of evidence and arranged for Rockwell to serve a 5-minute sentence for a jailbreak attempt during his imprisonment in the county jail before being released. So he did serve a 5-minute sentence. Justice was served. Now, I don't know if this is true. It's probably not, but it's a super fun story. So Porter Rockwell, again, he was accused of this, and the story goes, and it could be made up. There's a lot of stuff about Porter Rockwell that's made up. And he was like this gruff, Wild West guy. He was a lawman. He was all sorts of stuff. And apparently, like, Alexander does this thing, and they go through it. The prosecution comes up, and they're going through this, and they're going through that, and where were you, and all this kind of stuff. And the story goes, the fun story goes, apparently Porter Rockwell stopped him and said, "Listen, if that was me and I was that close, he would be dead." And everybody was like, "Yeah, that's okay." And they let him go. 5 minutes in jail, and he's out. So that's the story. Don't know how true it is, but it'd be fun if it was. Kind of a fun story. All right. My favorite thing from this, and whoever wrote this, I thank you very much. 40 years after the events of 1838, an aged Donovan visited Salt Lake City, Utah territory, which had become the nucleus for the largest body of Mormons following the death of Joseph Smith. He received a hero's welcome and was feted and thanked by the Latter-day Saints for his role in saving the life of their prophet. So that's Alexander Donovan. That's not all, folks. He was a big deal, like I said. Sadly, I will say he had 2 sons, both of whom died before they were 18 years old. So he had his fair share of trial. Donovan County in Kansas is named after Alexander Donovan. He was inducted into the Hall of Famous Missourians in 2008. Jefferson City, Missouri has a bronze bust of him on display in the Capitol Rotunda. Donovan Drive in El Paso, Texas, if you've ever been there, is named after him. And there was a Camp Donovan as an army buildup for World War I in Oklahoma. So this guy is a very big deal. He's got counties named after him. He part of the New Mexico Bill of Rights was written based on what he did, and he was such a big deal that Joseph Smith named one of his kids after him. I mean, this is a big deal guy. There's as I was researching, I was like, this can't be the right guy because there's statues to him and all this kind of stuff. But no, Alexander Donovan, remember that name. Big, big deal. Big, huge guy. And I would say, who knows, but he seemed like a very noble American soul. So that's what I would just add to that. We get a tirade of letters after this. We get a letter from W.W. Phelps. He's describing conditions in Missouri. We get another one right after that from W.W. Phelps a week later. The people are scattered. He's pleading for victuals and clothes, right? Just give us some food, and we're basically going to die. We need help. We get another one from Edward Partridge. It's an original draft. It's in Edward's hand. Probably was never sent. But the people are scattered, their property is damaged or destroyed. There's lots of frustration that no elected official or anybody in government is going to do anything about this. And so he's upset. That's Edward Partridge's letter. We then get a letter from John Corll, part of the same letter campaign as everybody else's, describing issues in Missouri. He was told, or he tells that he was arrested, that the store was vandalized, and that Philo Dibble was actually shot through his bowels. And the mob tried to attack John Corll and Sidney Gilbert, but they somehow survived it. So that's that letter. We get another one from Moses Dickerson. It's actually a letter to Moses Nickerson, which is up in Canada. So we're going to switch here for a second. This is not part of the same group of letters. And there's a report of successes on their mission. So this is the Prophet Joseph Smith sort of telling this branch that they just left. Positive experiences, baptizing members, ordaining them into offices of the church. So a little bit of positivity going north instead of south to Missouri. I should say west to Missouri. We then get a letter to leaders in Geneseo, New York, on the 23rd of November. We're going to get a little bit of drama here. So the original letter was written by Oliver Cowdery, and things got real up in upstate. So I'll give you this from the historical introduction of the Joseph Smith Papers. Nearly a month after they left Kirtland, Pratt and Johnson again arrived in Geneseo. On the 29th of December, 1833, Pratt attended a meeting with John Murdoch, who was still preaching in the area. Pratt recorded in his journal, quote, "Brother Landon did not ask us to preach, but preached himself. However, Brother John did say a few words to the congregation after Brother Landon had got through. After meeting, we went to visit Brother Landon and found that he still rejected the vision." So this is section 76. "And said that it was of the devil. In the evening, Brother Murdoch preached upon the priesthood. Murdoch confirmed that Landon continued to speak against Joseph Smith's vision. Pratt, Johnson, and Murdoch scheduled a conference of elders for the 31st of December to discuss Landon's attitudes and actions. At the conference, Johnson served as the moderator and Pratt as the clerk. Landon, however, refused to attend, an act that was interpreted as treating the visiting church representatives, quote, with contempt and ridicule, unquote. After examining Landon's case, the elders at the conference unanimously gave their voices against him, and he was cut off from the church the same day. And we demanded his license, but he refused to give it up. Johnson reported to the Evening and Morning Star that Landon had been silenced by the voice of said conference for promulgating unscriptural principles and refusing to give proper satisfaction for his conduct. The Star further reported that when Landon refused to give up his elder's license, he was excommunicated, quote, according to the rules and regulations of the church, unquote. So not a pleasant experience. And by the way, yes, this is the same John Murdoch who just left his family again to preach in the eastern states. So this was a combined effort. This is part of the work that he did on this mission that he was called to do in section 99. Further into this, we get Landon influenced others in the congregation, and over the next month, over 24 other people in Geneseo were also cut off from the church. The congregation, however, continued to function under the leadership of John Murdoch. In March of 1834, Joseph Smith and others traveled to Geneseo while recruiting men for the Camp of Israel expedition. During their visit, Joseph Smith attempted to reclaim Ezra Landon and show him his wrong, but his effort was all in vain. Joseph Smith, however, was successful in recruiting men from the Geneseo area for the Camp of Israel expedition. So John Murdoch went off and did some good there. Tried to maybe clean up some things, but also kind of took care of this congregation after there was a bit of a rift, to say the least. All right, 3 last things here. We get a letter to Edward Partridge on the 5th of December, and the historical introduction gives a good summary here. It says, perhaps because the information he received was inconsistent and possibly in an effort to document the violence against his followers, Joseph Smith wrote this 5th of December letter urging church members in Missouri to, quote, collect every particular concerning the mob from the beginning and send us a correct statement of fact as they transpired, unquote. Until then, he wrote, it is difficult for us to advise. Even without clarification, Joseph Smith told the Jackson County church leaders that if they had not yet been driven out, they should fight to stay on their lands as long as they could. Quote, you should maintain the ground as long as there is a man left. It was right in the sight of God that you should contend for it to the last, unquote. So, those are some fighting words. There's another letter to Edward Partridge. 5 days later, it says, basically says that Joseph urges the leaders to refer to the revelations and to seek legal redress for their losses. And that letter might have never actually been received, but that's his thing. Like, take comfort from the revelations and get a lawyer. Like, let's do this right. And the final thing for this part is a letter from W.W. Phelps 5 days after that. So this is 15th of December. Enumerating again a lot of the issues in Missouri, asking for advice on what to do, and trying to get church operations back on track and independence. So that is that. As we get into our last part, what I'm going to do is just kind of finish up 1833. And as you see, we get 101 revelations in this short period of time. And so pretty much from this point forward, you're going to see sort of a downtick in the amount of revelations that we get and a big uptick in a lot of the other documents. And so I'll be summarizing more things into one as opposed to what I'm doing now. But hopefully this has been enjoyable. And we're going to light into part 4 in a moment in the last things we get out of 1833.